All right, I think we're all set. First off, welcome and thank you everybody for coming out today to honor Dan. As most of you probably know by now, Dan had a compression fracture in his lower spine Friday, so Dan can't be here tonight. However, Dan's son Kier is doing a Facebook live stream right now, and we're also going to take some video of this to make sure Dan gets to see the whole program. At the end of the program, if anybody would like to do a personal message for Dan, Kier and I will be doing some videoing of that too, so if you want to leave a little message, we'll record that for you and we'll make sure Dan gets to see that. 20 years of going to Ducks Unlimited banquets. I don't think a single night has gone by where I've been at a banquet where somebody in the crowd hasn't come up to me and said, how the heck is Dan Olson doing? Everybody always asks about Dan. So it's an honor to be here today doing this event. Our first person I'm going to introduce here is going to be our MC. This guy, 40 years ago, Dan came up to him with a microphone and said, you know a lot about wildlife art, you should be the MC for this event. Jim's been a volunteer ever since. He's MC'd over 1,000 Ducks Unlimited banquets, so he's a perfect guy to do this. Events. Jim is also the recipient of his own dedication. He's a great person. His dedication was down at Rush Lake, a place that's near and dear to Dan and his boys. They've done a lot of hunting here, or down at Rush Lake. So Jim, we'll give you the mic and thank you very much.
This is a unique event for Dan, but it's also a unique event for me and for everyone else, because once you've had a tribute, you're kind of like, wow, they did something like that for me. I'm always just amazed that every time we do something like this. So that's a really good thing. First of all, though, I'd like us all to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Please all stand and cover your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Two. Right on cue. I honestly had that all planned, you know? All right. No, it really is an honor to have a tribute, and it's too bad that Dan couldn't be here, but I know a lot of his family is here and that, and there's a lot of people here that, holy smokes, we've had a 30-year relationship, a 35-year relationship, in some cases a 40-year relationship with a lot of you people. This is really spectacular. My heart's really just going crazy right now seeing everybody. So without further ado, then I'm going to introduce Greg Meither, our state chairman. He's going to kind of take over here and give us a few words on how everything else is going here.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you all for
Was that okay?
coming out this morning. This is really, as a state chairman, it's going to be one of the highlights of my 2.5-year term, and certainly an honor for me to be here this morning. So on behalf of the 33,000 BU members throughout Wisconsin, the 1,900 volunteers, and the 10 staff members, welcome this morning, and we'd like to hear everything you have to say good about Dan. It was like last night we went out with they called it an old-timers dinner. I think maybe I was the youngest guy there. Oh wait, no, Jeff was there, but but it was fun, and it was interesting to try and put a face to the names again. Some of these folks I hadn't seen for a long time. As I look around the group that's here today, I certainly see Shell and Kier and 6 grandkids, all good people. They all look a lot like Dan, actually. And I see DNR folks here. Dan was with the DNR for a while before he came over to Ducks Unlimited, and of course I see all kinds of past state chairmen, RDs, regional directors, zone chairmen, committee people, committee members, all kinds of interesting, good people. It's just my pleasure to see all of you folks again, and in tribute to Dan. When we first approached Dan to see if this was okay with him, which we really had to do, you know, Dan looked up, he said, well, he said, if it's for the Ducks, and you know, Dan, if it's for the Ducks, I'm good with it. And he said, if it raises some money for Ducks, I'll even be better off, he said. So I would pleased to announce this morning that this tribute on behalf of Dan brought out $316,000 worth of donations on Dan's behalf and on his tribute. So let's give all the folks that did that a hand. They said I was going to have a teleprompter, but apparently not. Today, this event is a little bit personal with me. I've known Dan for a long time. I knew him when he was working with the DNR, and the only recollection of my first interesting meeting with Dan was when he was with the DNR. Part of his responsibility was to come up to Door County and run the Conservation Congress meetings. And so one of the questions on the ballot that night was that the DNR wanted to have a rule that you couldn't shoot coyotes north of Highway 64 during the gun deer season. And I don't know, I just didn't agree with that. And after the meeting, I had to go up and have a discussion with Dan. And I said, geez, Dan, I said, maybe if you can't tell the difference between a coyote and a wolf, you probably shouldn't be in the woods hunting at all. Well, Dan stood his ground, said, no, that's not the reality. He said, a lot of people don't know how to do that. So we kind of friendly agreed to disagree. You know what happened, the wolf situation. We all know what happened there. So I expect a few of those people up north to be laughing a little bit about that. Certainly Tom Body back there someplace should be. There he is back there. He should get a little kick out of that. But in addition to that, shortly thereafter, Dan went over to Ducks Unlimited, and he asked if I would be the zone chairman shortly after he took that position. And he was the regional director in different parts of the state. He handled most of the eastern part of Wisconsin, southern, eastern Wisconsin, southeast, and then ended up in northeast. And at that point, he asked me if I would be willing to do the zone chairmanship's position. And so that started a volunteer staff working relationship with Dan that lasted for many, many years. That was back in the early 80s, if I recall correctly. So from that standpoint, we would get together. We weren't close friends, but we would meet at various Ducks Unlimited events, conservation events, and we always talked about hunting, of course, and outdoors. And Chris mentioned Rush Lake. Dan always talked about Rush Lake, and quite frankly, at the time, I had no idea where Rush Lake was. I was from northeast Wisconsin. I stayed and hunted up there. Knew a little bit about Horicon, but nothing about Rush Lake. And so he always had his comments about too many cattails, too shallow water, too many people hunting there, and all those kinds of things. But he always talked about the good times that he had down there, particularly on the opening weekends. And I don't know how much Dan had to do with this, but DU went on to develop a master plan for the restoration of Rush Lake. And when I was over there, I think it was 3 years ago now, those discussions that we had special meaning to me, because we were dedicating, in fact it was Jim Granosi's dedication, and we were dedicating a tribute to Jim, as well as dedicating a piece of property that was donated on the west side of Rush Lake. And when you stood on that property and you overlooked the lake, all I could do was think of Dan and all the comments he made about Rush Lake, and I'd finally gotten to experience it and understood what he was talking about. So DU continues to implement that master plan at Rush Lake, and in my mind it's another tribute to Dan, because I'm sure that he had something to do with that plan. Another interesting discussion we had was the Ocano Marsh. Dan lived not that far from there, north of Green Bay, and he always talked about the Ocano Marsh. So I think 3 years ago, our state biologist, Brian Glenzinski, was leading a what we call a policy field trip or a legislative field trip, where we take legislators out to show them what we're doing. And at that point in time, Ducks Unlimited had been instrumental in some land purchases out there, and they were doing some work along the dike that separated the marsh from the Bay of Green Bay. And again, I thought of those discussions that Dan had talked about, his hunting experiences on the Ocano Marsh, and I thought, again, another situation where Dan was involved, and here's DU following up, and we're making improvements to that particular piece of property. And I thought to myself, in the later years when Dan was no longer able to pick up the gun, he mentioned some of the times that he was able to go out and hunt with his grandkids and sons on that piece of property. And I guess I thought that same day that here was probably a legacy that we would all aspire to, the ability to hunt and recreate on a piece of property with your grandkids in particular, knowing that you had a hand in preserving and making that piece of property available to the general public. And I thought to myself, what a legacy that we would all really want to be able to take credit for. So Dan, if you can hear or see me here, thank you very much for that legacy. That's what we're here for today. We really appreciate it. Our next guest is a longtime friend of Dan's that I'd like to introduce. His name is Charlie Woolley. Charlie and I have met a couple of times in Washington, D.C. on various trips when we were in that area, advocating on behalf of the Ducks and the Great Lakes. Charlie is currently Regional Director for the Midwest region of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. His career with the service started back in 1978 when he worked as a fishery biologist in Alaska, Florida, and Maryland. Later, he worked with the President's Domestic Policy Council Interagency Task Force on wetlands. After his stint in Washington, D.C., Charlie became the field supervisor at the East Lansing field office in Michigan for 8 years. He has continuously served as the Department of Interior's trustee to the Great Lakes Fishery Trust since 1997. In the Midwest region, Woolley served as the Assistant Regional Director for Ecological Services. Beginning in 2004, Charlie served as Deputy Regional Director, carrying out the USFWS mission in 8 Midwest regional states. In December of 2018, Woolley was appointed to the President to serve a year term and 6-year term on the Federal Commission representing the U.S. on the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. Woolley is the author of 15 technical papers and recipient of many awards and special recognitions. And probably the highlight of his career, Charlie graduated from UWSP, Go Pointers. And best of all, Charlie has been a friend and worked with Dan on many projects throughout Wisconsin. They got to know each other probably 35 years ago. Tim introduced them, and they've been friends, fished together ever since. So there's nobody more qualified to attest to Dan's accomplishments.
Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. Appreciate it. I've been asked to do 2 things here this morning. First one is just a quick synopsis of the working relationship between the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and Ducks Unlimited, particularly here in Northeast Wisconsin. And when I say U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I'm also talking about the great work relationship with Wisconsin DNR and a whole host of other conservation organizations. We have a wonderful working relationship with Ducks Unlimited. We couldn't have a better conservation partner in this part of the state or in the state of Wisconsin in general than DU. Easy to work with, technically sound. They bring a sense of purpose. They bring a sense of passion to the projects that we've worked on over the last 20, 25, 30 years in this part of the state. They also bring technical expertise that we in the Fish and Wildlife Service don't have. They have wonderful engineers that know how to design wetland restoration projects that last and provide environmental benefits to people, fish, and wildlife. So it's just a wonderful working relationship. Highlights that I've been able to be involved in with DU have been in the Uline waterfowl production area, wetland acquisition aspects. Rush Lake, we just heard about that. I'm so proud to have had a small part in working with Dan and DU, Wisconsin DNR, to help provide funding for Rush Lake and restoration work there. Oconto Marsh, we just heard about that. Barkhausen, right down the road. Bergstrom, Bone Farms, Two's Acres, Duck Creek Delta, all the work down the bay at Cat Island. Great working relationship between the Fish and Wildlife Service, Wisconsin DNR, Brown County, and Ducks Unlimited. Multi-million-dollar, multi-year project that's going forward because of these great working relationships, the great partnerships. Dunes Lake, up in Door County, south of Bailey's Harbor and Jacksonport, another great project. So I just want to tip my hat to the great staff, Ducks Unlimited here in Wisconsin. Acknowledge that Dan has had a lot to do with training and working with that staff over the years. And just the environmental benefits that have accrued from this working relationship are just tremendous. And a lot of us have benefited from them. A lot of the citizens of Wisconsin have benefited from those working relationships and those projects. And I'm very, very proud to have had a small part in that. Now, if you noticed, as I walked through these comments and identified a lot of these areas, I did not mention Sensabaugh, which is just up the road, Sensabaugh Wildlife Area. That's where Dan started his career with the Department of Natural Resources. It's about 600 and some acres now, and Dan has had a profound impact on that piece of property over time. And it really identifies and highlights who Dan is when you focus and you talk just a little bit about that project and the restoration that's occurred with it. It now supports, it's about 600 acres now. When Dan started, it was a lot less than that. Dan worked on it with Wisconsin DNR, and in turn, he worked on it fundraising with Ducks Unlimited. There are 220 species of birds that utilize that area, including one of Dan's favorites, the grinning mallard. He loves grinners. Most people call them shovelers, but Dan calls them grinners, smiling mallards. He loves those birds. They're in there. Another tribute is that area is open for people to go in and train hunting dogs. And Dan loves that kind of activity. And it's his fingerprints that are on that restoration that have allowed people on their own fruition to go in and train hunting dogs. He also appreciates the fact that the Wisconsin DNR has it open early in the season for a youth hunt. And Dan has always been passionate about the next generation coming along, providing opportunities for them to learn how to handle a gun safely, how to appreciate waterfowl on the wing, how to be a good conservationist and a good hunter. That occurs on a yearly basis right there. And it's a real hallmark to Dan, and it's just a small little microcosm of what he is as a person. I've been very, very fortunate over the years to have spent numerous times with Dan and Tim, Beanie, George, Jim, and others down at Rush Lake. It's a special place to him, and I'm so proud that he was able to introduce it to Tim and I, Tim Kreff, and it's a special place for me now. And I've had an opportunity to be out in punt boats with Dan and Beanie, Tim, and others, be out there in Go Devils with them, spending a day in the marsh. I remember distinctly one day, we'd been out since about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, got back on a cold evening back to the duck shack that the Olson family has had in their repertoire for years. We never fired a shot. We're sitting there having dinner at the table, Again, never having fired a shot. And Dan says, that's the most beautiful, most fantastic day I have ever had waterfowl hunting. Do you guys remember seeing all those monarchs that were migrating across Rush Lake? Do you know where they're headed? They're headed to Mexico. Can you imagine that? This small little, let's see. We may need an extra battery. Anyways, this small little butterfly migrating from Wisconsin all the way to the mountains of Mexico. It just thrilled Dan. That was the subject of conversation that night. You didn't have to fire a gun. You didn't have to put something down and use the retriever to go get it. It was just the beauty of being out in nature. And Dan appreciates that more than anybody I've been around. And it was a wonderful moment for me to see the passion that he has for the natural world, and for me to learn a little bit more about that passion, and hopefully start to instill that in others. Just a wonderful, wonderful memory. I've had some other memories with Dan that go back to fishing with these two gentlemen here, two Olson brothers there, my friend Tim, up on Rainy Lake in Ontario, where we have had the opportunity to fish together, spend time at a wonderful place called Mudge's, learn about each other, learn about our families, connect as human beings, but also fish in one of the greatest places in the world to go fishing, particularly muskie fishing. And I can remember being out with Beanie in his boat. Tim was in the boat with me and Dan. The sun was just starting to set behind the spruce and pine trees at the far end of a really sacred place that was named by Jim Olson, the nursing home up on Rainy Lake. The sun is setting, it's almost dark, and we start to hear this sound, oompa, oompa. It sounds like a musical instrument coming from the shoreline. And I said, Dan, what in the world is that? I said, Charlie, that is one of the greatest sounds in nature. That is a bittern. You won't see a bittern. They're described as secretive marsh birds. But Charlie, Beanie, Tim, you and I, we're under the spell of that bird right now, and it's a privilege to be able to hear that bird, because most people never get that chance. Most people never get to fish in a place like the nursing home that has that kind of background. And again, typical Dan. He didn't focus on, we've been out there all day long fishing for muskies, we've never seen a muskie, we hadn't even had any action. He focused on the beauty of nature, and that story has stuck with me also. Just the power of looking at something that is so interesting and so unique, but it's pure Dan Olson, pure Dan Olson. My last little segment about Dan has been over the last 4 or 5 years. It's been tough, really tough for Dan to get around. And I've had the pleasure with Tim Kreff and Beanie to be out on Green Bay, fishing with Dan in Beanie's boat. Chris, his wife, brings Dan over. Now Beanie, Tim and I, we've been out there since 4 in the morning, launching the boat. Been out there 4 in the morning, probably haven't caught anything. Dan shows up at 10 o'clock, ready to go. It's really powerful because Chris drives him over to the launch ramp. Beanie gets out. There's a special box that Beanie's made to get Dan into the boat. Dan gets into the boat and just has a wonderful time for 4 or 5 hours. We don't catch any fish, but we have a wonderful time talking about folks such as Gito Torrey, Ducks Unlimited in Michigan, other DU employees, the families, and we just have a wonderful time reconnecting. And again, it's Dan at his finest, talking about family, talking about nature, talking about his experiences with Ducks Unlimited. Dr. Bob from Ducks Unlimited in Michigan, who was very influential in Dan's career. So I'm just so privileged to have had this little insight, compliments of the Olson family. Just so privileged to have been able to share with some of these events. And I just want to let Beanie, Kier, and Tier know, And Chris, the love that you have for your father and the way you show it is remarkable. And I'm just glad I've had a chance to observe that, be a small part of it with my good friend Tim and the two Olson brothers that are here today. Thank you all.
He's ran to get some.
But we don't have a battery for this, so here,
I'll take that.
you can have that. I hope everybody can hear me. It's kind of unique that Lon Knadler's here, and I have seen his dinner down in Kenosha for a lot of years. Did you get it working? You did.
I turned it on, Jim.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Greg. I'm glad you showed up today. All right. Okay. It is kind of unique, though, that we were talking about Dan. And Dan and I don't think I was his first zone chairman, but I know I was his first district chairman. And so we would always talk before whichever dinner we were doing at the time, and talk about something that was going on that we saw maybe on the way down and that. I know Lon Knadler and I used to talk about that all the time. Seeing some birds, some wildlife, just as the thing is going on. And he's back there waving us. And it happened again this week. I was like, oh my God, I'm hearing these stories about a black-billed whistling duck in Watertown, Wisconsin, which is just south of the it's a huge metropolis, Houstonburg. It's just south of there. And so it's like 18 miles south of there. And I live outside of there. So I thought I'd go down there and see if I could see this duck. I mean, because let's face it, he's a long ways from home. They're pretty common in Latin America and Mexico and that. And actually, they do get into Texas and that. But sure enough, there were people down there where this guy had been coming in for like 5 days straight. Of course, he didn't come in the day I went down there, but there were people there that had pictures of it on their phone and that, and they showed me. And so I thought about that. I thought about this coming up this weekend with Dan and all the other people in that I know we share stories with about wildlife and that. And sure enough, it was a black-billed whistling duck that's in Watertown along the Rock River. So that was just crazy thing that happened. So a little while later, though, somebody did see the duck with a hen mallard, and I think we might have the real reason why he was up here. So with that, I'd like to introduce Brian Glazinski next. He's our state biologist, and that, I mean, it's very unusual that we have our own for just our state. It's very unusual. Most places they have 6 or 7 states that they got to take care of. But Brian, I've known him for a long time, and he's done such a wonderful job here and that with all these projects. And I mean, there's a lot of projects all around the state of Wisconsin that Brian's had his hand in. It's all up to you. And the mic's working. Thanks, Greg. Greg, whatever you did.
I turned it on.
And that, if you know Greg, that's not his strong suit. That's a miracle right there. Thanks, Danny. Thank you. But no, it is an honor to be here. I mean, there are legends in the room here, under the tent around here. You know, Charlie said a lot right there. Tom Body, I work for Tom. A lot of people know I worked for DNR for 15 years. I kind of followed Danny around in that sense, and you know, as a conservationist, being in the presence of some of these legends and honoring a legend in Dan it's something really powerful when you look at the impact and the legacy that cumulative we've all had a small part in putting habitat on the ground and all these projects that Jim just talked about. But there's another legacy that lives on thanks to Tom Body and other people who share these stories. I didn't even realize the legacy that I share an affliction. I didn't know this, that Dan was also late a lot to certain events, and I have that propensity myself, and Body always would say, oh, it was icy roads. Didn't matter if it was 80 degrees out or and I come to find out just here that was a Danny Olson line. That came from Dan, icy roads. So I've been using his excuse this whole time. I didn't even know it. But so the legacy goes far beyond what we're doing on the ground, but in the hearts and minds of other conservationists. Wooly, you had to go. You got me all emotional. But this is so. But before I get into the weeds here on this project and some of the stuff, I do have to give a big shout out to the staff of Brown County, Matt Creasy over there, Jason and Ben. You know, when I left DNR, I came to DU. I always said it's like there's this wind behind. I got a tailwind now, and every time I meet with partners, they're always like, yeah, DU, come on in, we need you, let's get some work done, this is great. And I was thinking this morning, like, you know, it's the duck head, you know, everyone's got such great respect for the duck head, but I was thinking this morning, like, why is that? And it's because of people like Dan and people like we have here in the room, that the duck head carries that weight, and that I can come in here and these guys welcome me in and we can get projects like this done on the ground. And so this is just one example here. We've done a lot of projects here at Barkhausen, and because of that relationship, this property was purchased as part of a settlement with Wisconsin Public Service, and Brown County had $300,000 to restore this property, and so they turned to DU to help do that. And so what you see behind you is a DU design. We've got a pike spawning marsh component on this side of it. We've got deeper water here for waterfowl in the background, and everything's planted to prairie around it. So just a real classic waterfowl restoration project with the pike spawning twist to it. In the true DU fashion, we then took that $300,000, put that up as match to a North American Wetlands Conservation Act grant, and now we have $1 million to go do other good stuff throughout Northeast Wisconsin. And so just super proud to be part of the DU team, and to honor Dan here with this site here, and continue on with the legacy that he started, and just proud to be your biologist to make these things happen, and we'll keep doing it. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Brian. This state, really, we're very, very fortunate again to have Brian and all the people that are here from the Fish and Wildlife Service and everything else. So this is so unique that we're able to do so many projects in that. This is just wonderful. With that, Dan's family is here, and I know Dan can't be here, unfortunately, but who is there somebody that wants to speak? You gonna be the one? Okay, all right.
I'm Tira. I'm Dan's daughter. Hi, Dan.
Allegedly.
So he has asked me to read this for him. And yes, this came last night, sitting in the hospital room on a paper towel. And first I want to acknowledge Chris. Thank you, Chris, for sitting with my dad and making this possible for him to be here with all of us today. It's super important. As I look out over all of you, what I see is dedicated conservationists for wetlands and waterfowl. Thank you for motivating and inspiring me and others. There are too many people to individually thank. For me, working with the state chairmen was an absolute privilege. Thank you for all the partnerships and the ability to enjoy projects with family and friends. I didn't do this to be recognized. I did this because it was my passion. How many people can say that they were able to work their entire career doing the job they loved? I can honestly say I never had a bad day at work. It saddens me I'm not there. Thank you all for making the journey to be at this event. Thank you to the staff at Barkhausen for the work that you do for the waterfowl. Sorry. I told you I should have written this on a piece of paper, Dad.
You can dry the tears with it too.
Yeah. His final words are, "I'll be back, and I look forward to seeing the project." So thank you all for coming.
You turned it off again.
The green light, Jim, the green light.
There's only 2 buttons.
I know. There it is. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. I was coming up actually to hold the mic so you could do it. I was trying to be helpful. Wasn't just trying to get it away from you. So at this time then, do you want to take over here, Steve, for a little bit?
Yeah. Thank you. I'll do the administrative portion. As you know, these events are always informally formal. So I'm going to try to keep a little bit of control before I lose it and the conversation starts and everybody goes wandering around. In a moment, we'll invite the family up with Greg and Jim to unveil the Karen. After that's done, we're going to do some photos with them real quickly, and then I'm going to ask them to sit down, and I'd like to do some recognitions for people who contributed to the tribute event and recognize a few other people as well. Once that's over, I'll bring everybody up for the big grand group photo. And I'll have special instructions of please look at me and smile, hold the jokes till you're done. It's amazing. I take about 40 pictures and I maybe get one because somebody's always looking and saying something funny, they think. So just eyes on us. And then afterwards, we'll do some individual pictures. So at this time, State Chairman, Olson family, and Jim, if you'd help unveil.
Sharp objects under there again?
There are some sharp.
We have sharp objects under here, so. Are we ready, folks?
Yep.
Voila!
Yeah, come on. Right here.
No, not yet.
We'll just stand awkwardly in the middle.
Sure, I wasn't looking down at it, Steve?
Yeah, I got
How's that? Better?
There you go.
That was on purpose, right?
Thank you.
I mean, I know the name, you know.
I think we'll be able to get them to talk or hear it.
All right, we're going to FaceTime our dad in here, see if we can get him to connect. As you guys well know, he is very well versed in technology. I still get the occasional fax joke from him. And I don't even have a fax machine. All right, we're trying here. All right. Terry, you want to text Chris, tell her we're going to FaceTime? Most of you don't know me because I'm the one that didn't hunt and fish all the time. So obviously he kept me in the basement. But he would be here, but he's currently selling raffle tickets to all the oncologists on floor 9 at St. Vincent's. All right. Let's see if she can. Is she gonna FaceTime me or try this again? Unfortunately, though, for my wife and most of us, the stuff about stopping for wildlife is genetic. I didn't realize it, but I usually drive on the wrong side of the highway because I'm looking at, is that a deer? Is there a turkey there? I'm pretty sure that was a thrush. So, all right, we've got him in here. Now we got to see if we can get him facing it. We can't see it yet, Dad. Hey. So here he is. So I'm going to put him on the speaker here. You know, this is my iPad. You'd think I know how to use it. All right, Pa, you want to say a few things, or?
Well, I am deeply impressed by the work that everybody put into this thing. I'm honored, and I wish I could have joined you. But as Tom likes to say, shit happens.
Here. Okay, that was embarrassing. All right, Pa, anything else you'd like to say?
Here it says we have a poor connection.
Yeah, I know. We're in the middle of a swamp.
Yeah, okay.
All right, well, we'll let you guys chat with people here in a few minutes. We're going to continue on with the event, and we'll FaceTime you back. So, everybody, Dan Olson.
Thank you. That's awesome. I enjoyed all the stories, but being a fundraiser, I met Dan in 2013. My conversations with him were a lot different than yours because I'd sit down, he'd offer me coffee, and then he'd ask me who I asked for money that week. And he gave me ideas of who to go ask for money because he knows without your contributions and your efforts and everything that you've done from his agency partners, I still remember the days of waiting for your party permit and no turkeys and pulling over. That's all the fruits of your labors and what we're doing here. And I'm asking for money from people that Danny and Ron Nicholas and I think Reed, I haven't met you yet, but I'll meet you later. But what a tremendous legacy that you can all circle back to Danny and it's awesome. And thank you for all that you have done for Ducks Unlimited. Thank you for all that you continue to do for it. And we, the current folks on the ground, it's a tremendous responsibility that we continue on your legacy. So thank you for what you do. And most pointed, the people who contributed new gifts to Ducks Unlimited. Instead of bringing you up right now, I'm just going to ask you to kind of stand up and just kind of wave, and we'll go through this quickly so we can get to the group photos and then on to lunch. But Len Albiniak, Chris and Liza Anderson, I gotta tell you, as a development officer, to get an RD to make a pledge, it's like one of the hardest things in this job to do, but Danny put the pen to paper, so thank you, Chris. Jim and Sandy Beitzel, thank you. Jay and Lisa Carr, who are here, Bruce and Sandy. Greg went out and solicited the Door County Community Foundation, and there's loose guidelines to the tribute. It's like you got to somehow tie it back to the person you're doing it for. But it motivated Greg to go out and ask somebody else, and that's a tribute to Danny's efforts being a pioneer in this fundraising industry. And Bob and Kim Spurl, Tim Kreff started the way. I'm making a gift, but you're doing something for my buddy. So thank you, Tim, for lighting the fire. And everybody else jumping on. Carl Dix, Mike and Kay Paczynski, Bob Schelk, Bob and Diana, Terry and Kathy Schrader, Todd and Lisa Schubring, Brian Shu, one of the engineers who designs things like this, Ken Skoronsky, Nels and Jill Swenson, Dr. Christine Thomas, Ron Van Royen, who can't be here, Bill and Marilyn Autumn, Ron and Helen Nicholas, thank you for your efforts in recruiting some very fine volunteers that continue to lead the organization. Greg and Marcia, Don and Janet Lown, and I think I hit everybody Jim Gronowski, almost everybody. And we continue to have great success because of your contributions. So at this time, I'll catch up with everybody to get their pins, but I'm going to do one more recognition, if you don't mind, because I missed the opportunity last week. Actually, two. One is volunteers make this organization run. I've had the opportunity to work for a very fine volunteer who Danny influenced to what is it, 30 years now, Todd, you've been doing it? Todd's wrapping up his term as our state campaign chairman. Put Wisconsin tops in the country. The last time that there was actually a matrix, and I say we're the reigning because we continue to knock it out of the park. So Todd, if you come up, not much I can do for you other than give you something to drink when you get up a little late. And one other recognition, I was glad to see him here. I don't know where he went, but is Lon still around? There he is, Lon. I got a plaque delivered to me, so come up and get this is my favorite plaque to give away with Ducks Unlimited. Lon and Bonnie have completed their benefactor level with Ducks Unlimited. It's a wonderful plaque, wonderful commitment to the organization. Thank you for all the years that you partnered with Danny to make it successful. Thank you. Yeah, he did. And Lon volunteered, Lon and Bonnie have volunteered many years, many miles for the Ducks, and many contributions. Thank you. With that said, let's try to wrangle this nice group picture, which I can give to everybody. So try to tall people in the back, short folks in the front. Come on up.